Welcome to the Commercial Real Estate Academy podcast, the podcast dedicated to simplifying the commercial real estate industry for the masses. Each week, we sit down with industry experts to dissect the many facets of commercial real estate and extract valuable lessons you can apply to your business. Whether you're a new or seasoned business owner or investor, the Commercial Real Estate Academy podcast will be your go-to resource for all your commercial real estate needs. Now, here are your hosts, Raphael Collazo and Jeff Walston.
Welcome to the Commercial Real Estate Academy podcast. I'm your host, Raphael Collazo, here with my co-host, Jeff Walston. How's it going, my friend?
It's going great. Just beginning of this year, just got over COVID after the holiday season. But I'm excited for the new year and everything that's going to come down the pipeline. So what about you, Raphael?
Yeah, no, I can relate to you in the COVID situation. And yeah, unfortunately, we had to miss your wedding because of the fact that my fiance got contracted COVID and we had to quarantine. But, you know, hopefully this is the tail end or finishing part of the COVID situation. I think that hopefully now we turn the corner, and I know business activity has been picking up pretty good over the last several weeks. So I'm excited. I think 2022 is going to be a great year for business in general. So, but speaking of a great conversation, we actually had a phenomenal conversation with Spencer Burton. He's the head of real estate investments at Stablewood Properties. And he's also the CEO and co-founder of Adventures in A.CRE, where he interviews, you know, a variety of different professionals pertaining to the commercial real estate industry. And he provides a bunch of spreadsheets and really coursework to be able to help those individuals who are interested in learning how to underwrite commercial real estate opportunities, whether they're in the project property management side, the brokerage side, or really any facet within the commercial real estate industry. So during our conversation, we talked about his background in brokerage and in the mortgage lending industry. He was involved in both prior to the 2008 financial crisis. And when that hit, he actually had the opportunity to go down to Panama and work on some housing down there, which is definitely a unique experience. And given Jeff's background in developing in Central and South America, he was we just talked about the different challenges that he faced as a result of him being in those environments. We also talked about how his experience on the institutional side. He used to work at Northwestern Mutual, which was, you know, a large company that both did the acquisition of properties and also financing for acquisitions for other parties. And this is obviously on the institutional side. And then we also talked about his background with the Adventures in A.CRE, why he decided to start it, why it's one of his passion projects, and how he's been able to scale the business over time, because it's kind of taken on a life of its own at this point. And it's one of the top resources out there for those interested in the commercial real estate industry. And finally, we talked about the brand building piece, the personal brand building piece. As we talk about in a lot of our podcast episodes, I think it's extremely important. It's probably the most valuable thing you can foster, because if you don't control your personal brand, others will. And so we kind of talked about different strategies you can use in order to amplify your personal brand so that going forward, it really serves you well. So those are some of the things we talked about in this podcast. It was super engaging. Jeff, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Spencer is just an impressive guy, and he's got a lot of experience, like you said, different countries and worked out of the U.S. and such things and stuff. So I'm excited for you guys to listen to what he has to say, and I know that you guys will enjoy this episode.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I know Spencer, and he's a great time. You know, we were kind of, bantering back and forth about stuff. So it was really a great conversation. And so without further ado, let's go ahead and dive right into the episode.
All right, well, welcome, Spencer. It's great to see you this fine morning.
Yeah, Raphael, great to be here.
Yeah,
awesome.
Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, for sure. And for those of you guys who don't know, we actually, I reached out to Spencer via LinkedIn. I had followed him and his Adventures in A.CRE content that he produces on a regular basis. And it really is a phenomenal piece of content that he provides on a regular basis. And so I thought it'd be great for us to have him come on and talk a little bit about his experiences. So again, really, Spencer, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, guys. I'm looking forward to this.
For sure. So if you don't mind, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe a little bit about your background?
Yeah, sure. So I feel old, but I'm starting my 20th year in the industry. I started my career actually as a land broker in a relatively small market in the Northwest US, really bird dogging land deals. I got into brokerage because I viewed that as, you know, in that time, there wasn't formal education in real estate like there is today. And I wanted to learn the business. I ultimately wanted to get to the principal side. I wanted to have my own real estate investment firm, and brokerage was a really good training ground for that. So I spent, call it 3 years in land brokerage, eventually went to work for one of my clients. And for the next 8-9 years, essentially doing the same thing, sourcing as an acquisition professional, and then moving into a development role, residential land development opportunities, initially in the Northwest United States. And then as the Great Recession hit, really liquidity in land lots specifically dried up across the country. We looked overseas, and I was sent to Central America, to Panama specifically, where we built single family houses for, call it 6 years. Great experience. I knew though, as the Great Recession was hitting, that I wanted to pivot to the institutional side. I wanted to pivot more into the commercial investment side of the business. And so as we were winding down one of our projects in Panama, it made sense. And I went back to school, went and got a master's degree in real estate at Cornell. And so spent 2 years in Ithaca, New York. This would have been 2013. During that time, I met Michael Belasco, who is my co-contributor and co-founder of Adventures in CRE. He and I both came out of Cornell, went and worked at big real estate institutions, but at the same time, we were building Adventures in CRE. It was, and it continues to be, kind of our labor of love. It's an outlet for us to share this passion that we have for education, for the industry, to elevate the industry, and to teach real estate financial modeling. At the same time, I continue to work in industry. So I spent a little over half a decade at the real estate investment arm of Northwestern Mutual, ultimately helping open Mexico for them, and sourcing really all property types except for hotel investments across the United States and Mexico. As the pandemic was hitting, myself being entrepreneurial, oftentimes the best time to start new companies are in times of great disruption and dislocation. I was approached by Glenn Lowenstein, former CIO of Hines, co-founder of Lionstone. He'd recently sold Lionstone, and he was looking for a team of partners to start a new kind of next generation real estate investment firm. And so I joined the founding team of Stablewood Properties. We're now almost 2 years into Stablewood. Our first year did about 50 investments. They're small, single tenant net lease essential retail assets. So about 200 million of volume in our first year. Partnered with a big institution, and for 2022, getting my years mixed up here, is the start of 2022. We have big things planned for this year. So anyway, that's Jeff and Raphael, kind of me in a nutshell.
Yeah, that's a very broad overview over your 20-year career. And so you mentioned you were in Central America. I know Jeff, he used to build dental labs all across, South America. He's done some work in Central America as well. And I'm actually Puerto Rican, so speak Spanish as well. So good to be alongside someone who's a fellow Spanish speaker. So
Igualmente.
Qué bueno. That's awesome.
Yeah, you seem like you have a very diverse track record after Cornell when you graduated there. And so my question, what I was trying to pick up is, what really got you interested in commercial real estate?
Yeah, I've been in the industry really, so call it brokerage, in high school, I plumbed. I was an apprentice plumber plumbing new single family homes. That's actually where I kind of fell in love with the built environment. It's kind of silly to say, but here I am, this kid, and I'm crawling around crawl spaces after school on weekends and during summers. And I would see these clearly business people arriving at the job site. So, you'd have 150 homes, and I'd be crawling in one of them a week, and then the next home, right? And you see the home going through its full cycle, and eventually people moving in. But there are these people who show up in these really nice trucks, and they come out in their business casual, and they look around, and I thought, I want to be them. It's silly to say, but that was kind of that's where my interest really started with commercial real estate. And it's grown from there as I've learned more about the industry and recognized I don't really like the development side of the business, to be honest. I don't like the cyclical nature of residential development in particular. And so the commercial investment side brought more stability to my career. But just the built environment, the whole idea of being in the market for space is really fascinating to me. And I've kind of loved it since I was a kid.
Yeah, it's always interesting to hear people's logic as they start going into the business. I come from an engineering background. I was a software implementation consultant for about 5 years before jumping into the brokerage side. As you said earlier, I mean, the brokerage side is a good way for someone to get their feet wet, learn by transacting, and then, kind of go from there. So, and we've had people we've interviewed that have really come from so many different diverse backgrounds that kind of fell into the commercial real estate industry. And so, what you're doing with your thought leadership platform, and hopefully what we can contribute as well, is to showcase that, I mean, it doesn't matter what your background is. It just, as long as you have an interest, as long as you have a passion, there's going to be something for you within the industry. So
no, I think that's absolutely true. I think, different people get into brokerage for different reasons. Brokerage can be very lucrative. And in fact, many of my friends who got into brokerage with the intention of going into the principal side or starting their own business have stayed in brokerage because it's so lucrative. Some wash out because they can't survive. They don't have the kind of the interpersonal skills to survive. For me, it was very much, I wanted to learn the business, and I thought the best way to learn it was by being an advisor to someone that I wanted to become and or work for at some point. And it was a really good outlet. Either way, and I speak to a lot of universities, a lot of young professionals who are looking to break into the industry. Brokerage is one of the better ways to break into commercial real estate.
Most definitely. Yeah. And then that kind of leads me to my next question. So you mentioned how when you graduated, I'm assuming you graduated from Florida State and then got into the brokerage side of things, and also some of the mortgage side as well. It seems like, can you kind of talk a little bit about that background, some of the lessons you learned along the way, and then maybe some of the lessons that you learned during that time frame that helped you leveraged to now take on different roles, as both in the development side and then eventually in the institutional side?
Yeah, call it the first 10 years of my career were very entrepreneurial. And when I say very entrepreneurial, really small boutique. So I described brokerage, which is brokerage by nature, is entrepreneurial. In that you eat what you kill, you're building your own business, your own pipeline, your own clients. And so as I shifted it to the principal side and essentially becoming an acquisition professional, my comp structure, and this is not uncommon for more boutique firms, my comp structure was largely weighted towards my performance. And so even though, there was a base there to keep the lights on, my upside was in my ability to perform. Right. And that's very common for boutiques. What that also meant is when you have that sort of comp structure, that gives you opportunities to invest outside of, call it, your day job. And I've always been this way. I've always had, part of it is just my nature. Like, this is fun for me. This is my career, also happens to be my hobby. And so it's not like the lights turn off at 5 and I go do something else. The lights turn off at 5 and then I go do something that happens to my hobby. And it just so happens, and I'm lucky to correlate to what I'm doing in my day job. And the two are synergistic and accelerate the progress of my career. And so at the time, my first 10 years, now to your point or your question about, call it, the mortgage side, I had a friend while I was in brokerage who was in residential mortgage business. And so as we were developing lots, we're selling these to builders. Builders have clients who need mortgages, and there was some synergy there. And he approached me about, hey, what if we started a mortgage company, and what if we mirrored it after Remax would be an example on the residential brokerage side, but essentially you go after the big hitters. You provide a flat fee structure in mortgage where they keep the upside and their volume keeps the mortgage company happy. And we were quite successful in that. So I put some seed capital in. I helped with strategy, and for 2-3 years, it was going better than either of us could have dreamed. Now, what's interesting about youth and naivety is that you don't know what you don't know, and quite frankly, we were dumb, and it was dumb luck, right? And so it was great until it wasn't. And what we didn't fully understand was how the product that we were moving to market, and it was fine product. We were originating mortgages generally Alt-A mortgages, which I don't even think they exist anymore, but it was a sister product to subprime, but for high quality borrowers. And most of what we were originating was Alt-A. Well, when subprime disappeared, Alt-A disappeared. We hadn't had the foresight to get an FHA product included in our offering. And essentially for a year or two, FHA was largely the only product you could sell. And that the mortgage business essentially hit a brick wall, right? I learned a ton from the Great Recession. It was a very tough time for those of us in the business, and the mortgage business in particular. So, but yeah, I learned a lot. That, you know, what I learned, the good and the bad, has really benefited me in now the second half of my first 20 years in the business. But yeah, you learn most from those sorts of situations.
Oh, for sure. And I think what these lessons teach us is it adds on to our decision-making framework, so that going forward, you have new experiences with which to utilize in order to make better decisions. And so, you know, anytime, and again, I haven't had to go through that recession. I hear many people talk about those times and the difficulties that they faced. And from those experiences, from what I gather, I mean, people just are able to now realize, okay, the great times don't always last. And especially when we're in a very cyclical business like real estate, it's important to have that decision-making framework as you're making those decisions, to say, okay, maybe it's not a good idea for me to pursue this opportunity because I'm just over leveraging myself to a point where it's just not going to be reasonable. So
yeah, it was, imagine next week, and it was almost this fast. In fact, in the mortgage business, it was December 14th. I remember this day specifically, December 14th, 2006. We turned the lights off. So our offices, we shared offices between, call it my day job and the mortgage business. We turned the lights off on a Friday. We come in Monday, and the primary secondary source for the mortgages that we sold had gone out of business. That was, I think they bought 40-50% of what we had. And in the coming 2-3 weeks, and they were a huge player. I mean, it rocked the industry. Now, at the same time, what's ironic is if you read the Wall Street Journal, you thought things were rosy because that was the front end of the wave, right? And so again, this is December 2006. That happens, and that was a tidal wave. But my point is, imagine now today, 2022, next week, maybe you manage your portfolio. Every asset in your portfolio is worth 25% less than it was last week. What do you do? All right, imagine next week your client can no longer get financing on anything. I don't mean just on one thing, on anything. It was there was such a fear in the market that with a few exceptions, everyone essentially turtled up and said, we're just going to wait and see. And big, well-capitalized firms were in a fine position. They could just wait it out. Most of us in the boutique space, to use a kind of a personal finance term, we were living month to month, right? You know, it's high leverage. We all learn from these mistakes, but it was generally high leverage, fee-based businesses, and the fees dry up and your leverage is too high. And it washed a great majority of the boutiques out of certainly in the residential development space. So it was a trying time. And I guess the message is it could happen anytime again. And it makes you a bit paranoid. And I think, you know, a little bit of paranoia is good, especially when you're managing money and especially other people's money. And anyway, I'm getting a little long-winded, but it was an incredible time, and it really does change your perception going forward for me for the rest of my career.
It most certainly did for me as well. I was building and developing houses around that time, and my last deal sliding across the table was a $0 deal. Here's a free house. Yeah. Get it out of my, that was my end of my portfolio building career. So I feel you.
Isn't it crazy? Like, and I talk to young professionals in the industry right now. They don't comprehend. There was a period of time where you couldn't pay someone to take a lot off your hands.
Oh no, not at all.
But yeah, like today you go, well, who would be? It reminds me actually of the beginning of the pandemic, when oil prices became negative, or in other words, holders of oil were paying others to take oil off their hands. Well, that was essentially what it was like in the lot business, and as a result in the home building business, right? Liquidity was zero. and it's hard to fathom what, now 14 years out of that time, but that at some point will happen again. Hopefully not in our careers, but
yeah. Well, we'll see. Never know. We can only live from past experiences and the past history and try to learn. So
that's
and
right.
speaking of experiences and history and everything, you did some work internationally, correct? Was it
Panama?
In Panama? Okay. What was some of the projects that you did down there, and like what were the challenges that you faced?
Yeah, good question. So it's kind of a funny story, and we probably don't have time for me to give the intricacies of it. I describe how bad of a time 2008 was. Panama was kind of like a Hail Mary. The owner of the firm that I was working at, and really the capital behind the firm, very conservative individual, and had largely unlevered prior to really the major crash. And so he was in a good situation. When I talk about lots, developers trying to, giving lots away for free, that was not the situation for the firm that I was working at. With that said, he was in a position where he would just assume put the money in the bank and sit around for a couple of years. Well, here you have Spencer, who I had no marketable skill other than the ability to put land and lot deals together, and I needed something. And I didn't mention this in my intro because it's a bit complicated. I didn't have an undergraduate degree at the time. I got my undergraduate degree at Florida State in Panama as part of my Panama experience. And so here I was, again, 2007, 2008, no marketable skill other than my ability to put land deals together. That is gone. No degree to fall back on, and no other experience. And so it was really this moment where I went, okay, what do I do with my life? I know I love real estate. I want to stay in real estate. And I'd lived in Latin America. I'd lived in Venezuela actually for a few years. And so I spoke fluent Spanish, and I'd seen this phenomenon happening in Latin America, what I call an emerging working formalized class, not a middle class in the sense that we think, an emerging working class, meaning the previous generation made a decent living, say, taking a cart that the family owned, going to a street corner and selling bread, as an example, right? And believe it or not, makes a decent living doing that. They make great bread and people all stop there, but it's a cash-based business. There's no way to verify. And when you can't verify your income, you can't borrow against that income. Well, the formalizing class is the generation after them who, instead of taking the cart to the street corner, maybe is working as a bank teller, maybe working in an office setting, and they're maybe earning the same amount of money that their parents earned, maybe a little bit more, but essentially the same. But their income can be verified. Because they can be verified, they can borrow against it. And there was the finance system, world finance was becoming more advanced, more developed. And so these countries there were loan programs for them. And so I'd seen this phenomenon happening when I'd lived in Latin America in my late teens. And so in response to that, and I'd actually traveled to Latin America a few times, I said, I bet there's an opportunity to develop housing for that demographic. And I approached the head of the firm, and he kind of just laughed me off, like, well, but he knew I was in a tough situation. And so his response was essentially, well, if you bring me something, I'd look at it. And that was all I needed. It's like this little seed of hope in the midst of what was a really trying time. And so, I scraped a few pennies together. I took a flight. Well, first I'd done some research on different countries in Latin America. Chile was interesting. Nicaragua was interesting for their low-income housing program, but there were some political challenges there. The more advanced economies, and I say advanced, meaning there's more institutional investment, Brazil and Mexico specifically, they were too big for like the boutique type of deal we were looking at. But Panama was really interesting, a country of 3 million people, but almost a second world sort of country. The infrastructure is more advanced. You can drink the water. They use the US dollar. Corporate law is based off of Delaware corporate law. Foreigners can own real estate in a fee simple manner. There's all these reasons. And the biggest at the time, the Panama Canal expansion, a big deal, had just been approved. And they expected to create 30,000 jobs, which in a country of 3 million people is a lot of jobs. On top of that, unemployment was functionally zero. I thought that's really interesting. And so I put a couple pennies together, took a flight down there, literally hailed a taxi and asked the taxi driver to take me to a decent hotel. And I spent a week poking around, looking at where opportunities might be, and specifically looking at, call it entry-level housing, not like social housing that's backed by the government, but entry-level housing for the type of person that I described. And sure enough, they had a fairly well built out market for that. In particular, they had, number one, a projected housing deficit of 150,000 houses. And that was true. What's interesting about Panama is the least of your concerns is selling houses. You sell your houses in a weekend. The challenge is building them, but that's a whole other story. And so, but there was this opportunity. And so I come back to the States and I pitch it to the team. And again, very skeptical. But over a period of months, they came around. Ultimately, the decision was, though, hey, Spencer, if we're going to do this, we need someone on the ground who can kind of manage the investment. And that was when I transitioned from, call it, an acquisition professional to a development professional. Moved my family. At the time, I had a 18-month-old and a 3-week-old, and we moved to Panama and spent 6 years there. Incredible time. Like I said, I also went to Florida State while I was there, nights and weekends, so I could prepare to, eventually go get a master's degree. So, I'm getting a little long-winded again, but it was an incredible experience. We could spend a whole podcast about lessons learned in working overseas, but incredible experience, and it really set up my career for success.
Yeah, I know Jeff can speak to that pretty well, because he was actually responsible. He used to build dental labs in South America, and he'd have to deal with importing product and making sure they stuck on timeline. And yeah, Jeff, do you want to talk a little bit about that experience?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Well, I mean, like Spencer said, we could do a whole podcast just on that.
We can do a whole series of podcasts on that.
Oh yeah. We can just start with one country and just, each episode be the country and what you have to deal with and not deal with, and envelopes stuffed full of cash type deals. And here, let's, hey, you look that way and I'll take this type. It's just insane.
Yeah, we steered clear of that stuff, but that's the sort of thing they ask you to do, right? And as Americans, you got to be really careful about that. But
I know it was insane. Like you would think that they wouldn't want to do that, but that's the first thing they try. Is like, you don't know our laws here, so here, just do this. And it's like, whoa.
Yeah.
But anyways. Yeah, that's
in Chile. I lived in Chile for a bit too, so it's a beautiful country, man. I'm a big fan of South America. I've traveled to a good amount of countries down there, and I could see myself, potentially even having some time there, spending some more time there. So
let me tell you the biggest lesson learned, and this actually now applies to anyone listening who's going into a new market. It doesn't have to be a foreign market. It could be, but it's in the United States. You go into a new market. Drop the ego and recognize that just because they do it differently than you're used to doesn't make it wrong or bad. It may be inefficient, but you're not going to change it. And so you recognize, you accept that that's the way it is. It doesn't mean that you can't add some efficiencies or add a wrinkle that improves on the market, but while staying in the market. A good example is in Panama. These single family homes you deliver a whole phase of homes to people who had bought their homes at housing fairs. And so they buy their homes at housing fairs, and you deliver an entire phase to people. And how homes were delivered when we arrived, without a lawn, so there was no landscaping, and without any fixtures. And there are two things that, to us is like, what? How could you deliver a home without any light fixtures? Now, I guess they had plumbing fixtures, but they didn't have any lighting fixtures, and they didn't have a lawn. And the problem with that is 6 months after that phase was delivered, half the home's residents had added grass to. The other half maybe had blocked it in. Some of them hadn't done either, and they had a bunch of weeds growing up. And literally 6 months later, the phase looks like garbage. It looks horrible. Where in the United States, we're used to like this nice, perfectly manicured, and you got the homeowners association. And so all we added, we didn't add, too much, but we delivered every home with a completed landscaping package, and we offered a lighting package. They didn't have to take it, but we offered a lighting package. Those are the two things. And the beauty of adding or offering the lighting package is they could then finance the lighting package into their mortgage rather than having to go out and spend $200-300 to add lighting fixtures. Not a huge deal, but it made a big difference, such that when I left, every developer delivered their homes like that. little simple things, but my initial point still stands. Don't expect to change the standard in any marketable way, except that because you do it differently doesn't necessarily make it bad. It's different, and you have to learn to adapt to their way of doing things.
That's some great advice, and I think that's applicable to any business setting in general. I mean, anytime you go into a new organization or have a new experience, I mean, kind of getting rid of your preconceived notions and then coming a little bit more fresh allows you to think outside the box and be able to navigate that environment a little bit more efficiently than just complaining about the fact that it's not the way you thought it should be, because complaints don't do anything for you.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So if we look at Stablewood, so Stablewood is, where I'm a partner now. Glenn, when he envisioned Stablewood, he envisioned it one half kind of real estate practitioners and one half non-real estate data and tech professionals. And we're really trying to build what we're calling the next generation real estate investment firm, but it's a real estate firm that's founded, that's supported by technology and data in new ways. And so one of the, and I can get into several, but one of the non-real estate partners we brought in is a former data analyst, head of data analytics for a Major League Baseball team. And he comes in with a totally different perspective. And from day one, right, he's going, why do we value real estate this way? Why are these the data points that you care about? And he didn't necessarily try to change things, but he brings a perspective that's so different. And that's the case with all of our non-real estate folks on the team. Bring a perspective that's so different, and it really does add value to the overall process.
Oh, for sure. And I saw your guys' one of your most recent interviews, and you interviewed the gentleman you were referencing. Yeah, it's an impressive industry. How people you take the statistics and metrics of individuals and then extrapolate them out to determine what value they hold for that team.
Well, here's what's interesting about real estate and why there's so much runway for improvement in the data analytics in real estate. Real estate at its core is the business of space use, right? All demand is driven by humans' psychological need to use space. Some of that's for work, right? And we've seen that over the pandemic, changes either forced on us or not in how we use space for work, where we live, where we shop, where we play, where we worship, where we heal, where we die, and it's interesting. And so it's all about the use of space. When you think about data analytics, what data do we not currently use in real estate applies to trends in space use? And could we take some of that data, maybe it's used in other industries, hospitality, for instance, and apply it to our real estate analytics that will end up helping us make better, more informed investment decisions? Those are the sorts of things that we're exploring at Stablewood, that someone like Brandon with a completely different perspective, looking at batters. One of the things he looked at is, okay, does a certain batter perform better or worse if it's raining or not, or if it's cold or it's warm, or if it's windy or it's not windy, right? Like those sorts of data points that prior to hadn't been introduced. Well, what about in real estate? What data points could we introduce into real estate that would help us make better, more informed investment decisions? And anyway, that's kind of the runway that there is in this data space in real estate. It's fascinating.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And incremental improvement in efficiency when it comes to that sort of thing can lead to significant returns over a period of time. I mean, one of my best friends is an energy trader. He trades energy throughput in ERCOT, which is like because the US is on separate grids, and ERCOT's the largest grid in the United States, serves Texas. And he trades different nodes, and they analyze, weather patterns. They analyze all these different metrics to determine whether or not, what the output's going to be for particular nodes within a particular time period. And they utilize this software that they've improved over time in order to make better decisions. And if there's a 1% incremental improvement over a year period, what does that result in overall returns for themselves and their investors? I mean, it's pretty significant. So yeah. That's awesome. So one thing I wanted to ask you is related to the institutional side, because a lot of the people that are listening to this podcast, some are maybe on the institutional side, but a lot of them aren't necessarily on the institutional side. So your experience with Northwestern, I just kind of wanted you to talk a little bit about how was that experience? Because it looks like you did operate both on the investment side and then lending. Because I know that these types of institutional investors also are heavy into lending.
Yep.
So I kind of wanted to talk to you a little bit about that experience and, some of the lessons you learned from that.
Sure. Yeah. So the last decade I've been on the institutional side. At Stablewood, we very much are an institutional real estate investment shop. Our capital is institutional capital. So I can definitely speak to this. So first off, to your question, institutions generally view real estate as one of many investment options that are at their disposal. So any analysis is a comparative analysis to all of the alternatives that exist. And their alternatives span, from US treasuries all the way to, early seed venture capital and everything in between. Some's equity, some is debt. Each have their own risk profile. And it's ultimately about comparing the potential return to the risk profile of the investment and allocating capital in such a way that they maximize returns. I mean, that's what institutional investors, they're looking to take a big pool of capital and use all of the investment tools that are at their disposal to maximize that capital. Now, as it relates to real estate, institutions just have a different posture. When you're talking about an apartment deal, they might be comparing that apartment deal to a corporate bond that they could buy, right? It's completely unrelated to real estate. And so understanding the sensitivities that institutional capital has, the options that exist for institutional capital help you then better or be a more informed advocate for institutional capital or advisor to institutional capital or partner with institutional capital.
That makes complete sense. Yeah. Cause I mean, like you said, they're comparing various different assets, right? And they could range from bonds, it could range to, treasuries, it can range to all these different types of investments. And it's interesting to hear you say that because I personally have no experience on the institutional side. So that's
why we use IRR. Okay.
Yeah.
So IRR is a metric that's relatively new to real estate. It doesn't mean that, it's been used for 100 years, but it's relatively new because for many investors, IRR isn't that helpful of a metric. For institutions, it's key because, and it's key that they're analyzing in a way that creates an apples to apples comparison across all of their asset alternatives, inclusive of not a lot of, or mostly non-real estate. So IRR is essentially a time value of money yield, and it's paired with, say, a bond yield. And so if I get a nine unlevered, or let's use it more realistic, a 5 unlevered IRR on a multifamily deal, and I then can compare it to, say, a bond yield of 3%, and I say, okay, is that 200 basis point risk premium over that comparable bond, is that worth it or not, right? And that's essentially IRR. So now many non-institutional investors have adopted IRR simply because it's a nice comparative tool. But again, it's only as good as it can be used to compare one opportunity against another.
For sure. No, for sure. And for those of you guys who are listening who don't necessarily know the IRR, it's an internal rate of return. And typically speaking, you'd be comparing it to some sort of, discount rate or other investment. So what is the return of the other investment? And then you discount the cash flows back to the present state and then compare it and see whether or not it's worth it for you to pursue that opportunity. And it's obviously based on your risk profile. So if you're high risk, then maybe you're willing to take it. But if you're low risk, maybe based on what you analyze, you determine it's not. So
when I talk about comparative, right? A 5-year IRR with the same cash flow stream as a 10-year IRR will always be higher. Why? Because $1 today is worth more than $1 tomorrow in most environments. And so therefore, the comparative piece is important. So if I were to start a brand new apartment acquisition shop, if I'm going to hold for 3 years, I'm still doing a 10-year IRR. Why? Because then I can compare it against every other deal. I might hold for 3, I might hold for 4, I might hold for 5. You can show me a 5-year IRR. I'm still going to do a 10-year analysis. And that way I'm comparing everything apples to apples. Right. But then there's a whole other, list of metrics that are equally or more important depending on my investment strategy, from equity multiple to cash on cash return to, I'm looking at some of my risk metrics, my coverage, my loan to value. I'm looking at my operating expense ratio. I'm looking, my break even. There's all these metrics, IRR be one of them. But when we speak about institutions, the reason why IRR is so important and why you see it come up so much is because of its comparative ability in institutional investing to compare that real estate to non-real estate investments. Yeah.
Most certainly. Definitely. So One of the questions I want to ask you, which is really, I think, important, is related to your founding of the Adventures in CRE. You did mention it was one of your passion projects, and it really is a phenomenal resource. So if you guys are listening to this podcast, I would highly encourage you to check it out, because they do have a lot of insightful people that come on the podcast, and they talk a lot about different types of things related to the commercial real estate industry. But can you kind of talk a little bit about the decision to start that? Because a lot of people out there do not really consider about starting some form of thought leadership platform and creating some value when it comes to, adding value to the commercial real estate industry. So if you could talk about that, I think that'd be great.
Sure. Yeah. So adventuresincre.com. The acronym we use is A.CRE. Michael and I created in grad school. It was never intended to be a business. It's become a business on its own. It's still, for Michael and I, this kind of labor of love, is project where it's an outlet for us to share something that we're passionate about. And now we have a team around us that keeps that thing growing. But yeah, so in grad school, the genesis of it was this. So here we are, first years at Cornell. We want to get into these institutional shops, and essentially the skill that you need to have, it's really the way you add value on day one, is to be an expert at real estate financial modeling. And there's a couple tools that we use in the industry to model real estate, Excel being the most common, Argus being another one that you commonly see. But essentially you're modeling real estate cash flows. And when we say model, that's creating forecasts, right? So in the same way that a weather forecaster will create models to forecast what the weather is going to look like over the next week, we create models to forecast what the cash flows of a real estate investment look like over, say, a 10-year period. And the value of that asset today is completely related to those cash flows that we project over the next 10 years. So this skill was so important. And our professors in first semesters, like, you need the skill, you need the skill, you need the skill. We talked to recruiters or at different institutional shops, how's your modeling skills? How are your modeling skills? And we were feeling a little bit of stress around this. And on top of that, at the time especially, there were not resources really to master this skill. What we hear from our professors is, oh, you'll get this on the job, which creates this kind of chicken egg issue where I don't have the skills. How am I going to get the job? But how do I get the skill unless I have the job? And so we did what any person in our generation does. We turned to the internet. It's like, okay, there's got to be something online. And at the time, there was really no training, with a few exceptions. And in order to even find out what one of these institutional quality models look like, you had to pay $500 to download and buy one of these models. And we thought, this is crazy. Like, how are we supposed to learn this skill if we can't even know what the tool looks like that we're supposed to build and use? And so we started emailing alumni, and we'd say, hey, we're trying to learn this. Could you share a 4-tier waterfall model with me? Or could you share an office development model with me? Or could you share a loan analysis model with me, whatever it may be? And the response was always the same, which was, Cornell's got great alumni, very supportive. Absolutely. Here's a model, but it's proprietary. Don't share it with anyone else. And again, we went, this is crazy. First off, as we've learned the skill more, you realize these models are not proprietary. There's nothing in Raphael's model or Jeff's model or my model that's really any different. They may have different mechanics, and we may use different methodologies, and we might care about different metrics, but at the end of the day, they're basic finance concepts put into an Excel file or in whatever else it may be. And so at that point in time, this is now first semester, Michael and I said to ourselves, you know what, as we grow in our career, we're just going to start sharing our models for free, and so that the people behind us don't have to experience what we experience. That was the genesis of A.CRE. Now it's, again, grown into a life of its own. So over the years, we've shared 60 plus models. We offer them. Initially, they were free. We just let people download them. And it got to a point, I kid you not, every day we were getting emails. Hey, can I take you to lunch? Can I buy you a beer? Hey, can you send me your PayPal so I can donate some money to the cause? And so we've changed now where we offer our models on what we call a pay what you're able. 99% of people pay zero. And that's, again, the mission from the get-go. But many people want to contribute to what we're doing at A.CRE. They throw in $20 that helps keep the model. We update the models constantly. They're now kind of crowd updated. So for instance, our all-in-one has been downloaded over 100,000 times. Those people use the model. They shoot us comments. Hey, I noticed this error in this cell, or hey, have you thought about adding this? And so the all-in-one, for instance, has been updated 120 times, something like that. All 60 models are regularly updated based on feedback from the crowd. Now, as A.CRE's grown, another problem's popped up, which is, hey, how do I learn this skill? It's one thing to download models, see what it looks like. And so we've developed free tutorials over the years on YouTube that we also mainly share on our blog, written tutorials. You can download kind of a tutorial file that goes along with it. But again, people would say, hey, can you hold my hand? And at that point in time, we said, let's call it a paid product that if someone wants some hand holding, this program, and it's very much a program, not a course. Real estate financial modeling as a skill is like learning to play an instrument. You don't learn it by going to a weekend class or a workshop or a boot camp, or even necessarily have an instructor. What you need is to go in a dark room for a lot of hours and practice and iterate over and over. And the more you do that, the better you get. And so we created this program. We call it our accelerator program. And it's meant to accelerate the process of learning this skill. And the accelerators really took off. We launched it in 2019. In fact, at the end of this month, we're launching what we call Accelerator 2.0, which is kind of a revamp of the learning platform. We've also added these endorsement concepts. But the accelerator now is used by the top firms across the world to train their incoming analysts and associates. 30 universities around the country use it to train their real estate students. Thousands of just kind of regular U&Is buy the program and take it in order to master real estate financial modeling, whether it's start their own company, model their own deals, upgrade their careers. Anyway, that's A.CRE in a nutshell. Today, we've got 14 people on the A.CRE team. They keep it running. Again, I'm a practitioner. That's what I do. I don't have an interest in running a website, but I love real estate financial modeling. And so my role now at A.CRE is very much kind of content, and I'm on podcasts, Raphael and Jeff, I guess you've seen those. And really just continuing to share kind of this passion and knowledge that I have for the industry.
Oh, for sure.
Speaking of sharing, I know you have your personal brand, and how have you really leveraged that to help you in your investing career as a whole?
Yeah, that's interesting that you bring up personal brand. So I had this course at Cornell called, I think it was Entrepreneurship 101 or something like that. And there was one of our particular sections talked about personal branding. And this instructor, this professor, she had this philosophy that every single one of us have a personal brand, irrespective of whether we have our own company or we're working our way up the corporate ladder. We all have a personal brand, and we're the only ones who can determine what that brand is. The other philosophy she had, which is every one of us have an online brand, whether we like it or not. And so those of us who are listening to this, you're like, oh, I don't have an online brand, right? Yes, you do. If I Google your name, you have an online brand. It's either you control the narrative around your brand or the internet controls the narrative around your brand. Google your name right now, see what comes up. And if you're not happy with it, do something about it. And do something about it can be as simple as coming on Jeff and Raphael's podcast once, so that when they Google your name, that's the page that pops up. And now the world sees that you have something of value to give back. Maybe it's starting your own website, yourname.com, so that when someone Googles it, and it could just simply be your resume. But these are simple ways that you control the narrative around your personal brand. And so I had this class, and it actually was happening kind of in conjunction with as Adventures in CRE was growing. And so at the time I bought SpencerBurton.org. And I had adventuresinCRE.com, and those two together, again, it hasn't been so much proactive. It's more organic, as I've done things in my career, they pop up on those websites, but then I control, and each one of us should control our own personal brand on the internet.
That's great advice. I mean, that's literally the advice I share with people all the time, because like you said, you control the narrative. Like either you let someone else control the narrative about who you are and what you do, and, yes, the value you contribute to society, or you do it. And I also think it's extremely important what you said. It's very organic and it takes some time, but small deliberate actions every single day adds up to huge results over time. I mean, we started this podcast, just this past year, and we've seen the significant uptick in downloads over the last several months because of our being so deliberate about producing content, consistently asking for reviews from people, And, it's just taken a small life of its own. And it's only been, 8 months in, but you better believe in the next year or two, it's going to be quite significant. So
I love that idea of it's an aggregation of small efforts that build and grow over time. And like a snowball, pick up steam, right? It may never become the number one website or the number one, the best business in the industry, but as you contribute these small efforts over time, it grows. And so for me, like as it relates to my personal brand, what I'm doing at Stablewood is directly related to my caring about my messaging online, such that when Glenn Lowenstein, and he's very much a, Titan may be a little overstating it depending on how many Titans exist, but he's a well-known, well-respected individual in the institutional world. And, him going out and looking for partners, he was able to find me because my brand was there. And it's not, I'm not making anything up, it is very much, that's the organic piece. Like, don't try to be who you're not, but be who you are. And be proud of the accomplishments you have and the things that you're learning and things that you're contributing out there. And that will come back and reward you tenfold over time if you're patient.
That's awesome. Great advice, really. So, well, first off, we really do thank you for your time, Spencer. It's been a really enlightening conversation. One of the things we do is we have a few questions just to wrap up the interview and learn a little bit more about something related to that we're all very passionate about. And so we're all big readers. I know Jeff and I are both big readers, and our audience are also big readers. So wanted to share what's one of the most impactful books you've ever read, and kind of share maybe one of the big ideas that you garnered from that experience.
Yeah. So there's a book called The E-Myth. I think Grober, I believe, is the author. So if you're entrepreneurial, you have to read The E-Myth. Now I think it's like 30, 40 years old. There's some cheesy kind of outdated comments, but the underlying premise is very sound. And the premise is, and it's the E-Myth, but it has nothing to do with the internet, right? The E was developed before E was synonymous with the internet. But the E-Myth is the myth that anyone who goes into business for themselves is an entrepreneur. And you're not. And he uses in the book an example of, say, a plumber who for 20 years works his tail off, helping build the business that the owner of the company that the plumber was working for helps build that. And at a certain point in that person's career, that plumber's career goes, well, I can do that. And I can make twice as much as I'm making right now. Quits their job, goes out and starts their own thing, and quickly realizes that 10% of running a plumbing business is plumbing, and 90% is a whole lot of other things that person isn't equipped for. And then the balance of the book kind of lays out a framework for creating what the author calls the franchise protocol, but essentially systemizing your business in such a way that you could, if you wanted to, franchise it. Not that you would, but essentially systemizing in such a way that you recognize if you're running a one person business, that when you're taking out the trash, you're acting as the janitor, and when you're doing the books, you're acting as the accountant. And when you're doing the work, you're acting as the technician. And quickly you realize what role does what. You can develop job descriptions for each and eventually scale your business. That book, there's a lot of books that have had an impact. That one especially has been especially impactful for me.
That's awesome. Yeah. Jeff and I are part of a mastermind together. And that's something we harp on all the time is knowing your worth and understanding if this is the task, if this task is really something you should be doing on a regular basis. Jeff and I actually hired a VA just recently. Actually, this week was when they first started, and that was my first foray into that. I was always kind of scared about relinquishing control of processes, especially things that I've been doing for quite a period of time. But I realized that in order for me to leverage my time and scale my business, I need to be able to have someone take on some of the admin responsibilities, some of the other responsibilities pertaining to the podcast and everything else. And so I'm going through the process right now, and I'm learning a lot. I created a lot of manuals and tutorial videos to explaining all the processes. And that's all because of that book. I mean, that book really impacted my thought process. And, now I'm living it out, and hopefully, learning as you go, as they say.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say thank you, Spencer, from me for sure. We definitely both love having you on. I know that we could have talked way more about other things throughout the podcast, but I love what you shared with us, and we learned a lot. But there's one thing that we have. It's a CRE Academy treasure chest, which is a repository of things that the guests have given us, free things that we can give to our audience. And is there anything that you would be willing to contribute to that? Or
Oh, of course. Yeah. So I think the easiest way to download any of our models for free, guys, you're welcome to share the site, specifically for the treasure chest though. So whether you're new in the industry or maybe you're an old timer, which we run into as many of those, Excel is kind of the go-to tool, whether you like it or not. Whether you like it or not, you have to use Excel, and that's for the foreseeable future. At some point, someone will create a better alternative, but for the foreseeable future, you need to know Excel. Now, yeah, as we were talking pre-record here, that Excel can be a little overwhelming because, to be quite frank, 90% of the functionality of Excel you don't need for modeling real estate. And so about a year ago, we created what we call the definitive guide to Excel for real estate. And what it is essentially is I looked through all 60 of our models, 60 plus of our models that are in our library. And I said, which functions do we actually use? And then which features do we actually use? And then we created a tutorial for every one of those functions and every one of those features. So it's as simple as how to use a sum function, which I hope all of us know how, to I think the most advanced feature that we use in our models is index match, which is an alternative to a VLOOKUP or an HLOOKUP, which are very resource intensive. And so we don't recommend using HLOOKUP or VLOOKUP, and we teach what's called an index match, which is a much more efficient lookup feature. But essentially, we'll contribute that to this library. And if you're thinking of breaking in the industry, you're already in the industry, you want to know like the Excel functions that actually matter, that tutorial will teach each one of them to you.
That's phenomenal. Yeah. And I know personally from people that I've spoken with, I mean, I know that would help out a ton. So we really do appreciate that contribution to the treasure chest. So again, Spencer, we really do appreciate your time. If people want to learn more about you or get in contact with you in some capacity, what's the best way to do that?
Well, you can always Google spencerburton.com. I control
Exactly.
that. Well, you'll see one Spencer Burton is like this musician, and he and I have been battling for front page of Google for a better part of a decade. Listen to his music. I'm sure it's great, but you can Google spencerburton.com. You can also go to, you can Google A.CRE, just A.CRE. That'll pop up Adventures in CRE, or you can go to adventuresincre.com.
That's phenomenal. So then we'll include all that in the description below. So if you guys are watching this in a YouTube format, it'll definitely be in the description. If you guys are listening to this on a podcast format, it will also be in the description as well. So again, thank you guys all for tuning in. If you guys are listening to this in a podcast format, please leave us a 5-star review. It really helps with the algorithm and ensures more and more people can hear this message. If you guys are watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps to spread the message, and we really appreciate all the support that you guys have shown us over the last 8 months or so. So thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see y'all next time.